freeing yourself from repeat patterns. Today I'm going to look at not only how those are created and why we might have them and continue to have them, even when actually we'd like to not be repeating certain patterns. Why do we hold them? And I'd also like to shed some light on ways, really simple, practical ways, that you can release them both from the inside out and the outside in. And so let's look at why we have them in the first place. There's been quite a few videos made on the subject of our behaviors that might be reactive. And a pattern, in a sense, is a repeat reactive behavior. So I won't go too deeply into that part. I suggest you watch my other videos. You can find those on my YouTube channel. You find links in social media on Facebook and also on my website. And they're all free, and they're there for you to give you a little bit of a deeper insight into that. But just briefly, the reason we hold patterns in the first place is because we've developed a coping mechanism of a sort, albeit sometimes a very dysfunctional one. We've developed a coping mechanism for dealing with certain stressors. And so when we have an emotion, like, for example, the emotion of being overwhelmed, which is one I'm sure that most people can relate to, we may have developed in the first usually 5 years of life, and maybe a little bit longer, but not much, we'll have developed a way of coping with overwhelmed feelings. Now, I want to add, this is in instances, and very common it is, of where somebody has been subject to more than an average amount of that emotion. So it might be that they've had some circumstances growing up where they've been very overwhelmed emotionally, or with a lot of change, with things that they were scared of, and they haven't perhaps always had the guidance or the support, the sense of being met with that emotion by those who would support them, such as their parents. So you might hold, for example, that feeling of overwhelm as a memory and as something that can be activated every time you feel the same emotion. So for example, you might be looking for a job, and you might be dealing with some relationship issues, and maybe one of your parents is ill and you're caring for them. So let's just take a common life example. And you're feeling quite overwhelmed. You're feeling like you're stretched very thin, and emotionally the same is true. And so you might have certain behaviors that came from childhood that let you, I don't want to say cope with the feeling, but yeah, it is kind of like that. It did help you cope with the feeling. It might be that you ate too much relative to normal amounts. It might be that you went in your shell, you kind of retreated inward, and you didn't communicate with anybody because you had nothing to give at that point. It might be that, what else do people do? I mean, obviously drinking and smoking and actually anything at all. It could even be exercise. But you have a way that goes right back to the root of your childhood that you have dealt with those feelings of overwhelm. And so I know from my own experience in my own life that my pressure response has been twofold. One is to become quite demanding initially, so I try and get the attention of those around me who are involved in the situation and who might help me. And if that doesn't work, if I can't for some reason get their attention and get them to connect to whatever it is that I think they might be able to help with, then I go very independent and act without the consideration of the others around me. I start trying to deal with the situation. So the funny thing about that pressure response, and okay, so I'll go into this a bit deeper, is that although it's actually been beneficial in a lot of emergent situations, it's been incredibly useful because I can get things done and often deal with things more than average because of that pressure response. But it's left me feeling, growing up anyway, very isolated and unsupported, and at the same time, it stopped me from meeting my own feelings. So, okay, so that's a little bit of sharing from me, but let me tell you the way in which I understood that. So I understood that that was my pressure response because I could see the pattern. And really, it's not difficult to see patterns if you put your attention to it. You start looking at your life and situations where you've had a certain emotion, and often they'll be common ones, and look at the ways in which you've dealt with those situations. And you'll find if you start unraveling it and you don't get too caught up in the actual circumstances, but you look at the common emotions, you'll see that, yeah, that is a thread that runs through your life, for example. And so the behaviors that come up each time, the interesting part is, although you may be 20, 30, 40, 50, whatever years old, when you feel that emotion, you are immediately like time traveling back, and you are again that 3-year-old, 4-year-old who was feeling overwhelmed, which is why, and we ask ourselves, why do I do this when I know that it's not good for me? Well, the reason is it was once so-called good for you. At least it was the only way you had at that point of handling what was happening to you. And so you have to appreciate that. You're dealing with an aspect of you, you can conceptualize it as the inner child, but an aspect of you that started early in this lifetime. And so you need to, if you want to not continue to do this, first of all, for no other reason, and not to try and stifle, not to try and make change, suppress that, no other reason, just to meet that part of you. I say it so much, but basically that means allow yourself to experience that emotion, whether that be through your memory or because you're actually experiencing it in your life right now. Allow yourself to feel it, and if you can, remember that time earlier in your life when you also felt it, and you simply look at it, I want to say, in a neutral way. It's in a very deeply accepting way. There is zero judgment for the feelings you're having, for the people around you who might be part of that scenario or have been part of that scenario. It's all about going to your emotions at root and accepting them. Just accept. There is no good or bad, none at all. Okay, so you merge with that feeling by allowing yourself to feel it. You're kind of harmonizing with an aspect of yourself that's been shouting to be heard in your life through these behaviors that keep showing up, which may or may not be dysfunctional. But for whatever reason, you're not wanting to keep repeating that pattern. So that's the first thing. It's the understanding of where it comes from. The why you hold it is simply because, well, in some way it's serving you. At least to that aspect of you, it holds that because it fears to let go, and it's still unmet. So no amount of behavioral modification, positive thinking, self-help, self-care, life-changing programs, nothing is ever going to help you or anyone until you meet yourself. That's really what's waiting to be happened here. So what I want to say is that a lot of people on this awakening journey, if we're going to call it that, what they do, and I myself have at an earlier stage experienced this too, is they tend to want to jump ahead. So, there's an idea that the self, and I'll agree with this, is a construct. It's a hologram in a sense. It's a projection of your mind based on early experiences. And so what is the point of this work on self? Okay, I agree with that. Theoretically, I agree with that you're working on something that in a sense doesn't exist. This is for those of you who are at this place in your life. But irrespective of that, the doorway to, let's say, your infinite self and your oneness with all is going to be through the self, because until you meet these aspects in some way, then they remain and they keep showing up in your life. Now, there's also a point where you've done a lot of that. You've perhaps met all parts of yourself, but the behaviors keep showing up. And so what do you do? And this is why the question came up from one of my clients to make this video, because I think that he is himself a very aware person, and he's found that a lot of his behaviors, he knows where they come from often, but he keeps repeating them. So that's what I want to talk about today is what you can actually do about this. Okay, so I talk about from the inside out and from the outside in. Well, maybe there is no difference, but the way to the answers to what you hold is within you. But I think that doing this in a twofold way is actually really advantageous, and I recommend it. So, okay, let me look at the behaviors. So to use myself as an example, actually, a really good example. So that pressure response I talked to you about earlier, the demanding and independent dual response. So what I did was I first, I understood, I looked for the pattern, obviously, like I've described to you, and I understood that it was a pattern. And I also understood it was a pattern for when I felt extremely unsupported and overwhelmed and emotionally out of my depth. And so I understood then that there was a part of me that had a need and was not being heard. And so whenever I felt the need to be, to put more pressure on people around me to rise to the occasion and do what I felt they should be doing, or whatever, however that looked, I would just take a breath and allow myself to feel the feeling of overwhelmed. You know, it's really interesting, but we're not really letting ourselves feel the feeling, even though it seems like that feeling is governing us and creating all this pattern in our lives. We're not actually letting ourselves feel it right at the root. So I just sat with it. And you know, at this stage in your life, listening to this, you're not a child, so you know you have what it takes to deal with whatever comes your way. No matter what you tell yourself, you actually do. And so if you know that, you go to that earlier emotion and that part of you, and you just bring that awareness to it. And so it's almost like, to give it a picture, you're bringing the adult self to the inner child, and you're standing together, and you're integrating the two. You're harmonizing with the two. So I did that, and every time it came up, then okay, so here are some of the things I did. So the awareness and meeting the emotion, but then it would, I think, as many things are created this way, whereby you have the awareness of something, but still you'll see it from time to time. So I would see that tendency. So what I did is I disrupted the pattern. And you can do that in so many different ways. But okay, so to use one example of one client I have, you know, he talks about habitual patterns and how he wants to, you know, he wants to expand his life in certain ways. But he finds he returns to the same habits, the same familiar ways of thinking, and the same familiar ways of doing. Okay, well, neurology is really interesting on this subject. I love it because it sheds a lot of light on how we can make change. And so the first thing is that, have you ever wondered why, when you're on holiday or when you're in a new place, your experiences are so rich? Quite often. Have you ever wondered about that? Well, one of the reasons for that is that when we're in a new environment where we can't predict everything, we can't predict what people are going to say around us, we can't necessarily predict what we're going to see, what we're going to eat, etc., etc. So it's all new. And so as it's new, you're very present in the moment, because you have to be, right? You're designed to be. Consider it for a second. It's a survival mechanism that we have to be alert to change into new circumstances in order to be able to manage it. So we're fully absorbed. We are wholly present. We're not constantly thinking about the past and things from the past, and we're not projecting into the future. We are just present in the moment, hopefully, anyway. So if you know that feeling, you already have a bit of an answer as to what you can do. You change something, even the smallest things. Now, one client said to me, you brush your teeth with a different hand. Now that sounds silly. It sounds like such a small thing, but it's not. It's actually bringing you into presence, because if you do something differently, you have to pay more attention. And so you don't have the same amount of processing power available to you in that moment for your brain to run the usual program. You're actually right here, right now. So What can you change? Change the time of day you do things, change the food you eat, change the colors you wear, change the route you take home. I mean, it's endless. The possibilities of that are endless. But applied directly to a situation that keeps on occurring in your life, for example, some kind of behavior like my client I said, who might like to expand his life in certain ways. Well, for example, if you get up in the morning and your habit is to right away check your phone or go to your computer, if that's normal for you, it is for many, many people, don't do it. There's a start. Don't do it. Do you have to do it? Ask yourself that question. Is it urgent that you do it? Do you have to do it in that way? Get up, throw some sweatpants on and a sweatshirt and go for a walk instead. Or go down the road and get a cup of coffee in the local coffee place. Or make a meal for the evening. Cook something, create something, anything. But what I'm trying to say is, if you want to make change, you have to do things differently. Einstein said that in a much more clever way, but it's really true. If you stay within the same set of behaviors that you've always been doing and you're expecting change to happen miraculously, it's not going to happen. But just make change where you can, and in any ways you can, and in as many ways as you like. You're opening new pathways in the brain. So neurology supports that kind of change. So that's from the outside in. From the inside out are the things that I suggested to you already about meeting the emotions and understanding them. Also, disrupt your thoughts. If you have typical thought patterns and you notice that habitually when you do a certain thing you have a certain thought pattern, disrupt it. Have another thought. Change the thought. Change your way of looking at things. So if you look at the rain, as I am actually doing currently, because God knows there's been more than enough of it here, how I have wished to send all of this to Australia, actually, over and over again over the last weeks. Nevertheless, if you find that you're looking at something in the same way each time you look at it, don't do that. Look at it and see something different. So I do see the rain, and maybe the rain is an opportunity for sitting here and chatting with you. Apparently it is, 17 odd minutes into this video. So just change the way you see things, and it immediately will change the way you respond. You're disrupting the pattern, and that's what you're looking to do in all respects. Disrupt the pattern. Let me have a think if there's anything else that I can say about repeat patterns. Okay, so really, I guess really important is that you do the inside work first, and that you understand and you bring your awareness to it, and then you start trying these external measures to see if that can make a difference. If you find that every time you see a certain person you feel a certain way, and you find that you've done a lot of trying to understand your feelings and you don't really enjoy feeling that way, change the people, bring new people into your life, change where you socialize. If you find that you have a certain conversation with a certain person, I used to have repeat cyclical conversations with my father. What I did then was I would just introduce a different subject, change the way in which you respond. It's all about actually bringing change. And there's changes that we can handle doing even when we have this sense that we are holding something and there's a little bit of fear behind making that change. Any changes are actually going to be beneficial then, and they're encouraging, and they expand your sense of the possibilities. They expand your confidence that you can do this. But know that the very root of it is to meet this that is holding you, this pattern and these emotions, and bring it acceptance. And maybe even try something really revolutionary. Try imagining that there's nothing wrong with you, because that's really true. There's nothing wrong with you, and you're not broken, and you don't need fixing. Now, I know that a lot of what I'm saying sounds like I'm encouraging you to make change. No, I'm answering to the fact that many people talk about this, and this is something that they feel they want to do differently. Well, in order to make change, the very first thing you must do, and without the intent to make the change, is actually just to accept. So accept you, accept that part of you, accept that it served its purpose, and see where that takes you, where it allows you to add things into your life that can open up different possibilities. I hope this has been helpful and not too long. Please send your suggestions in. I love to hear them.